Part 3. West Clare, Ireland, November 1847. Winter announced itself not with snow, but with silence. The hedgerow had lost their leaves. The fields lay stripped bare beneath a pale sky, and the Atlantic wind came inland, carrying the smell of salt and seaweed. Every morning, Father Michael Donoghue looked from the window of the parochial house and counted the columns of smoke. There were fewer each day. Not because families had learned to burn better turf, because there were fewer families. Sunday Mass filled barely half the church. The pews had once overflowed. Children had sat on the floor beside their mothers while fathers stood along the walls. Weddings had ended with laughter spilling into the churchyard. Now entire rows remained empty. Donoghue knew every absence. There should have been the O'Connors beside the third pillar, the McGraths in the front pew, old Mrs. Keane, who always complained the sermon was too short, the Flanagans, whose youngest boy had rung the Angela's bell, gone. Some to America, some to the workhouse, some beneath the damp earth only yards from where he now preached. He closed the missal. "My dear friends," he began softly, "our Lord never promised us lives without suffering." A baby cried somewhere in the rear. He smiled. "It is not suffering that defeats us." Every face watched him. "It's forgetting that we belong to one another." No one applauded. Irish congregations never did. But afterward, instead of leaving quickly, people lingered, speaking quietly, sharing what little news they possessed. In these times, simply remaining together was an act of courage. Father Ryan spent the afternoon walking the lanes with a notebook tucked beneath his cassock. At every cottage he asked the same question. How many have been evicted? Who has fever? Who has seed left? Who has none? He wrote every answer carefully. By dusk the pages were full. Donoghue found him bent over the kitchen table. "What are you doing?" "A census." Ryan looked up. "If no one will count them, we shall." The older priest smiled. "So they'll not disappear twice." Ryan nodded. "Exactly." 3 days later they walked to the estate office. The stone building stood almost proudly above the village, its whitewashed walls untouched by want. Inside, a coal fire burned brightly. Father Ryan noticed the warmth before he noticed the clerk. It had been weeks since he had truly been warm. The estate agent, Mr. Pembroke, did not rise from his chair. I wondered when the clergy would return. Donoghue laid a folded petition upon the desk. 500 signatures. Pembroke barely glanced at it. "What is it?" "A request," I assumed, "that no further evictions take place until spring." Pembroke leaned back. "And who shall pay the rents?" Ryan answered calmly, "Those who are alive." Pembroke sighed. "You are sentimental men." "No," Donoghue's voice remained steady. "We conduct more funerals than you." For the first time the state agent's expression changed, only slightly. He slid the petition aside. "I cannot alter instructions." "Then send it to the landlord." "It'll make no difference." "Send it anyway." Pembroke studied both priests for several moments. "You truly believe paper can stop hunger?" "No," Donoghue replied. "But sometimes paper delays cruelty." The agent finally nodded. "I shall forward it." Whether he meant it, neither priest knew. That evening they passed a group of children searching a harvested oat field. The harvest had ended weeks earlier. Still they sprawled upon hands and knees. "What are they doing?" Ryan whispered. Donoghue already knew. Gleaning. The children searched for kernels overlooked by the reapers. One grain, then another, enough to fill a pocket after hours of searching. A little boy proudly held up 6 oats in his dirty hand. His sister smiled as though he had discovered treasure. Ryan turned away. "I cannot bear it." "No," Donoghue answered quietly, "but they can." 2 nights later someone knocked upon the parochial door long after midnight. Not loudly. 3 slow knocks, then 2. Ryan reached the door first. Outside stood an elderly farmer. He removed his cap. "Evening, Father." "Patrick." "I've a sick cow." Ryan blinked. "You've come for a priest because your cow is ill." The farmer glanced beyond Ryan into the darkness of the hallway. "No." His eyes held something different, something cautious. "May I speak with Father Donoghue?" The 3 men sat beside the dying fire. The farmer never removed his coat, and finally he spoke. "They've taken another 16 farms." Donoghue nodded. "I heard." "They'll not stop." "No." The old farmer leaned forward. Some men have decided they're finished asking. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? The farmer ignored him. His eyes remained upon Donoghue. We've begun meeting again. Donoghue's expression remained unreadable. Ryan, however, understood immediately. Ribbon men. The name itself was rarely spoken, even in whispers. Agrarian secret societies had existed in Ireland for generations, taking oaths of secrecy and resisting evictions, high rents, and informers through intimidation and sabotage. The farmer continued, We need men folk trust. Donoghue looked at him for a long time before answering, You've come to the wrong house. Have I? I'm a priest. So, Moses was a shepherd? Ryan stiffened. Patrick? No disrespect, Father, the old man stood, but hungry people eventually stop believing speeches. He placed his cap back upon his head. When you've buried enough children, you begin asking different questions. The door closed softly behind him. Neither priest spoke for several minutes, and finally Ryan broke the silence. He shouldn't have come. No. You'll tell no one? There's nothing to tell. Ryan seemed relieved. I thank God. Donoghue stared into the embers. So do I. Yet long after Ryan had gone upstairs, Donoghue remained awake. The old farmer's words refused to leave him. Hungry people eventually stopped believing speeches. He hated the sentence, because part of him feared it was true. The following week brought fever, not one household, not two, an entire village. Cabin after cabin held the same sights, burning foreheads, dry lips, children trying to nurse parents too weak to swallow. At one cottage, Ryan found a woman attempting to rock a cradle. The baby inside had died sometime during the night. She had not yet realised it. Ryan knelt beside her. Mary. She smiled faintly. He'll wake soon. Ryan could not answer. She looked down, touched the child's hand, then looked back at the priest. Oh. Nothing more, only that one word. It seemed to contain all the sorrow in Ireland. The parish house had become a place people entered without knocking. One afternoon, nearly 30 villagers crowded into the kitchen. Someone brought turnips, another a little meal. A widow arrived carrying 2 eggs. You keep them, Ryan protested. You've grandchildren. They need priests more. A fisherman mended the broken gate. 2 boys repaired loose slates upon the roof. Without discussion, without being asked, Donoghue watched through the window. They're feeding us. Ryan smiled. They've noticed. Noticed what? We're starving too. Neither priest had intended anyone to know. Yet there was no hiding hunger from hungry people. That night, Donoghue walked alone through the churchyard. The moon shone between fast-moving clouds. Fresh graves stretched almost to the old stone wall. He stopped before the newest mound, little Bridget McNamara, 5 years old. He remembered placing earth upon her coffin. He remembered her father trying not to cry. He remembered wondering how many more. A voice came from the darkness. You've been thinking. Patrick, the old farmer. Donoghue did not turn. You shouldn't be here. Perhaps. Silence settled between them. Finally Patrick spoke. No one asked the priest to stop being a priest. Donoghue said nothing. We ask only that you remember who your people are. I remember every day. Do you? Patrick stepped beside him. They're not asking for revenge. They're asking to live. Donoghue looked across the moonlit cemetery. So am I. Patrick nodded. Then pray for us. I do. And if prayer is not enough? The priest's answer came almost as a whisper. Then God help Ireland. Patrick disappeared into the darkness without another word. When Donoghue returned to the parochial house, he found Father Ryan asleep at the kitchen table. The younger priest's head rested upon folded arms. His notebook still lay open. Beside it was a list of names. Donoghue picked it up, and at the top Ryan had written, Families requiring immediate food. Below were 63 households. At the bottom, in cramped handwriting, was one final line. If food cannot be found before Christmas, many will not survive the winter. Donoghue carefully laid the notebook down, then he covered Ryan with the only blanket still left in the house. He stood for a long while, watching his young curate sleep. The old priest realised something that frightened him more than any eviction. Ryan still believed there was a lawful answer. He still believed petitions, sermons, and appeals might awaken consciences. Donoghue desperately wanted him to be right, because if he wasn't, others would begin offering different answers. and sooner or later someone would ask Father Michael Donoghue to choose between the peace he had preached for 30 years and the people he had promised God he would never abandon. Part 4. West Clare, Ireland, November 1847. The first frost came quietly. It silvered the stone walls before dawn, left the fields glittering beneath a pale morning sun. For one brief hour, County Clare looked beautiful again. Father Patrick Ryan almost resented it. Beauty had become deceptive. The frost covered empty potato drills where nothing remained to harvest. It softened the outlines of roofless cottages until they appeared merely abandoned rather than destroyed. Distance had become kinder than truth. He stood outside the parochial house, his breath rising in little clouds, listening. Nothing. No dogs barked, no roosters crowed. No children chased one another along the lane. There had once been mornings when the parish woke before the priests. Now it often seemed that only the crows welcomed the day. Inside, Father Michael Donoghue was carefully repairing one of the church's altar candles. Not replacing it, repairing it. He melted scraps of old wax into a cracked mould and poured them around a fraying wick. Ryan watched him. I never imagined we'd come to this. Donoghue smiled without looking up. Neither did St. Paul. Ryan laughed. I don't recall that passage. It isn't there. The old priest grinned. But had he served here these past 3 years, I'm certain he would have written something about candles. Ryan shook his head. You're becoming impossible. I've become Irish. You always were. No. Donoghue examined the candle critically. I've become poor enough to understand Ireland. The Archbishop's reply finally arrived 3 days later. Ryan had walked nearly 10 miles to collect the post. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. For weeks he had written letters, appeals for food, requests for another curate, petitions for blankets, medicine and funds. Every available bishop seemed to have received one. He read the letter silently, then again. Donoghue watched his face. Nothing. Ryan folded it carefully. They're praying for us. And they've little else to send. Donoghue nodded slowly. They're not refusing. No, they simply have nothing. Ryan placed the letter beside the hearth. I knew that before I opened it. Then why write? Ryan looked toward the crucifix. Hope deserves the courtesy of being disappointed honestly. The evictions continued, sometimes a single cottage, sometimes half a townland. The priest had begun carrying a small leather notebook listing every family now sleeping beneath hedges, in ruined lime kilns, or inside abandoned barns. One afternoon they found old Moira Brennan sitting beside the remains of her cottage. The roof had already been pulled down, only one wall still stood. She held a cracked teapot upon her lap, nothing else. Ryan knelt beside her. Where are your things? She looked at him with tired eyes. Those were my things. She lifted the teapot gently. My husband bought it the year we were married. Donoghue noticed the soot stains. It had survived decades of fires. Children, winters, harvests. Now it was all that remained. Will you come with us? He asked. She smiled. I'm too old to begin again. There's room in the church. There are younger souls who need it. Ryan reached into his pocket. He produced half a loaf of coarse bread. Their supper. She pushed it back. You'll need that. So will you. I've had 78 years. Ryan quietly placed the bread upon her blanket anyway. As they walked away, neither priest spoke. Donoghue finally broke the silence. She'll give it to someone else. I know. That night, long after Ryan had fallen asleep, Donoghue pulled on his boots. He stood for several minutes beside the younger priest's door, listening. Ryan's breathing remained slow and steady. Satisfied, Donoghue slipped outside. The moon was little more than a sliver. Clouds drifted low across the Burren Hills. He walked nearly 4 miles before leaving the road. An old ring fort stood upon a limestone rise overlooking the sea. Its ancient stone banks had guarded forgotten generations long before St. Patrick had ever come to Ireland. Tonight they guarded another secret. A lantern flickered within. As Donoghue approached, shadows emerged. Farmers, fishermen, a blacksmith, a schoolmaster dismissed months earlier when the village emptied. Perhaps 20 men. All removed their caps. None smiled. Patrick, the elderly farmer, stepped forward. You came. Donoghue answered quietly. I came to listen. No one spoke for several moments. The wind carried the distant roar of the Atlantic. Finally Patrick began. You know why we're here? I suspect I do. We've buried enough. No one disagreed. Patrick continued, "We've petitioned. We've begged. We've paid what rents we could. We've watched our neighbours die." He looked around the circle. "What remains?" Silence. Another man spoke. "They've begun marking cottages farther north." A third added, "By Christmas they'll clear half the parish." Patrick turned back to Donoghue. "What would you have us do?" The priest answered honestly, "I don't know." "Neither do we." Patrick sighed, "But we know what has not worked." The circle remained quiet, no angry speeches, no boasts, only exhausted men trying to imagine a future. Donoghue realised something unsettling. These were not revolutionaries. They were fathers, brothers, widowers, men who had simply reached the edge of endurance. Patrick produced a narrow strip of green ribbon. No one moved. "This society has existed longer than either of us." Donoghue nodded. "I know. We take no pleasure in secrecy. I should hope not. We ask no man lightly." Patrick held the ribbon in both hands. "We know the Church condemns unlawful violence." "I do. And yet," his voice faltered, "our children are starving." Donoghue closed his eyes. He thought of little Bridget McNamara, old Moira Brennan, the Walsh family burning with fever, the notebook upon Ryan's table, 63 households. Then he thought of the gospel, "Blessed are the peacemakers." The words echoed painfully, and when he finally opened his eyes, he didn't reach for the ribbon. Instead, he spoke. "If I stand among you, I remain a priest." Patrick nodded immediately. "No innocent blood, no revenge, no hatred." The men listened. "No attacks upon families, no harm to labourers doing another man's orders." Patrick answered solemnly, "Agreed. No killing." The farmer looked around the circle. Every man nodded. Finally, Patrick extended the ribbon again. "We seek protection. Not war. Protection." Donoghue hesitated longer than any man present expected. At last, he accepted the ribbon. Not triumphantly, almost sorrowfully, as though picking up a burden too heavy to carry. Patrick quietly clasped his shoulder. "Welcome." Donoghue whispered words no one else heard. "God forgive me if I've understood your will." When he returned shortly before dawn, Ryan was already awake. "You've been out." "I couldn't sleep." Ryan poured the last of the oat porridge into 2 bowls. "You walked a little. You look tired." "So do you." Ryan smiled. "We're becoming alike." Donoghue forced himself to smile back. He hated lying, even by omission. Over the following weeks, curious things began happening. Families received anonymous sack of oats. Bailiffs found eviction notices mysteriously missing before they could be served. Bridges washed away after suspiciously convenient accidents. Cartwheels disappeared overnight. No one was injured. No one claimed responsibility. Mr. Pembroke complained bitterly that lawless elements were interfering with the state business. Father Ryan privately thanked Providence. "Remarkable luck," he said over breakfast. Donoghue nearly choked on his porridge. "Indeed." "The rain," Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "It seems forever washing away bridges." Donoghue looked into his bowl. "It does that." One afternoon, Ryan noticed something odd. Donoghue had begun disappearing several evenings each week, never explaining where he went, always returning exhausted. Ryan mentioned it casually. "You've taken to long walks." "It helps me think." "About what?" Donoghue smiled faintly. "How to save a parish." Ryan accepted the answer, mostly. That afternoon after Mass, a young mother approached Ryan. "Father?" "Yes." "I don't know who's doing it." "Doing what?" "There was a sack of meal outside our door." Ryan smiled warmly. "Thanks be to God." "There was no note." "There needn't be." The woman hesitated. "My husband says," she glanced around carefully, "that the ribbon men are feeding widows." Ryan's smile faded. "I wouldn't know." "They've done more this month than the landlord." Ryan answered firmly. "Whatever good a man does, he must still answer for the means by which he does it." She nodded politely, but Ryan sensed she remained unconvinced. Hunger had a way of changing moral arithmetic. That evening, Donoghue stood alone in the church. The sanctuary lamp burned weakly. He looked up at the crucifix. "I've crossed the line." The church offered no answer. "I don't know whether I've crossed towards sin or toward my people." He remained there for nearly an hour, praying, questioning, listening. When he finally rose to leave, his decision remained exactly as uncertain as when he had knelt. Outside, the wind carried voices across the dark fields. Somewhere in the parish another family had lost their home. Somewhere else another child was going to bed hungry, and hidden beneath Father Michael Donohue's cassock was a narrow strip of green ribbon. It weighed almost nothing, yet it had become the heaviest thing he had ever carried.